Have you ever wondered how a simple act of kindness could change not just one life, but an entire community? In today's story, a young girl with the weight of the world on her shoulders helps a struggling veteran. And what happens next will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The rain hammered against the thin roof, its relentless rhythm seeping into every corner of the small home. Tara Monroe stirred on the couch, pulling her frayed blanket tighter around her shoulders. A faint drip, drip from the ceiling landed in a bowl nearby, joining the cacophony of the storm outside. She sighed, pushing herself upright as the faint light of dawn filtered through the curtains. "Tara, baby," Gloria's weak voice called from the bedroom. Tara's heart clenched at the sound. She quickly folded the blanket, smoothing it over the couch before heading to her mother's room. Gloria lay in bed, her face pale and drawn. "You don't look so good, sweetheart. Maybe stay home today. You worked so late last night." "I'll be fine, Mama," Tara interrupted gently, forcing a smile. "I can't miss more school. I've got a quiz, and I'm already behind on history." She leaned down to kiss her mother's forehead, ignoring the rumble of her empty stomach. "I'll bring your medicine and dinner after work, okay?" Gloria's eyes brimmed with worry, but she nodded, squeezing Tara's hand. "Don't push yourself too hard, baby. Promise me that." "I promise," Tara whispered, grabbing her worn backpack and heading for the door. The air outside was thick with humidity, the storm's weight pressing down on the neighborhood. Tara tugged her thin jacket closer, though it did little to shield her from the rain that soaked her almost immediately. She trudged through puddles, her shoes squelching with every step. Ahead, voices broke through the sound of the downpour. Tara squinted and saw a group of teenagers clustered around an elderly man in a wheelchair. They were shouting, laughing, mocking. The man's wheelchair was stuck in the mud, the front wheels sunken deep into the uneven sidewalk. One boy picked up a small rock and lobbed it near the man's feet, earning a burst of cruel laughter. Tara froze. Her heart pounded as she glanced at her watch. She was already cutting it close to making it to school on time. A tiny voice in her head urged her to keep walking, to pretend she hadn't seen anything. But as she watched the man struggle to shield himself, something in her snapped. She dropped her bag on the sidewalk and marched toward the group. "Hey, cut it out!" she yelled, her voice sharp and commanding. The boys turned to look at her, startled. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of them muttered something under his breath, and the group slowly dispersed, laughing as they disappeared into the rain. Tara knelt beside the man, her knees sinking into the wet ground. "Are you okay, sir?" she asked, her voice softer now. The man, Walter Higgs, though she didn't know his name yet, scowled, his weathered face lined with exhaustion and pride. "I'm fine," he snapped. "Don't need your pity." "This isn't pity," Tara said firmly, pulling a broken plank from a nearby construction site. "This is basic decency." Walter watched silently as she worked, wedging the plank under the front wheels and using it as a lever. Mud splattered across her uniform, and the rain plastered her hair to her face, but she didn't stop until the wheelchair was free. "There," she said, standing and brushing her hands on her soaked skirt. "Good as new." Walter glanced at the wheelchair, then back at her. His expression softened, though his voice remained gruff. "You've got a good heart, kid. Don't lose that." Tara smiled faintly, grabbing her bag. "Take care of yourself, sir." She turned and sprinted off, her soaked shoes splashing through the puddles. From the warmth of his car, Principal Samuel Grant lowered his coffee cup, watching the scene unfold through the windshield. He'd seen countless students over the years, but this girl, she was different. Quietly, he made a mental note to learn more about her. The rain had eased to a drizzle by the time Tara reached Savannah High School, but her soaked clothes and mud-streaked shoes made her stand out immediately. She hesitated just outside the main doors, wringing water from her jacket, then hurried inside, her shoes squeaking loudly on the tiled floors. By the time she burst into her homeroom, the bell had already rung. Heads turned as she entered, her disheveled appearance drawing a wave of stifled laughter. Tara's cheeks flushed, but she kept her head down, slipping into her seat near the back of the room. "Miss Monroe," came the sharp voice of Mrs. Calloway, her homeroom teacher. Tara looked up to see the older woman glaring at her over the rims of her glasses. "You're late. Care to explain?" Tara hesitated, glancing at her muddy hands. I, uh, I helped someone on my way to school," she began, her voice faltering. Mrs. Calloway cut her off with a raised hand. "Spare me the excuses, Miss Monroe. You'll never get anywhere in life if you keep making poor decisions. Detention after school," she said briskly, turning back to the attendance sheet. Tara's stomach dropped, but she bit her tongue. No point in arguing. It would only make things worse. She slumped in her seat, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes on her. At lunchtime, Tara sat alone at a corner table in the cafeteria, using a damp napkin to clean the worst of the mud from her uniform. The voices and laughter of her classmates buzzed around her, but she tuned them out. "Hey, look, it's the hero," a voice called mockingly. Tara glanced up to see Lena Carter, a classmate with a reputation for trouble, leaning against a nearby table. Lena smirked. "What's the matter? Muddy knees got you down." Tara rolled her eyes and muttered, "Some people just don't get it," before turning her attention back to her skirt. Lena laughed but didn't push further, sauntering off to join her friends. Detention felt like an eternity. Tara sat in silence, staring at the blank worksheet in front of her. She replayed the morning's events in her mind, torn between pride in helping Walter and frustration at the consequences. Doing the right thing shouldn't come at a cost, she thought bitterly, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. Principal Grant stepped into the room, nodding politely to the teacher monitoring detention. He glanced at Tara as he passed, offering her a kind, brief smile. Tara blinked, puzzled by his sudden interest. "What's his deal?" she wondered, watching as he exited the room. When Tara finally returned home, exhaustion weighed heavily on her. Gloria, sitting up in bed, noticed her muddy uniform and frowned. "Tara, what happened today? You look like you've been through a storm. Literally." Tara shrugged, forcing a smile. "It's nothing, Mom. Just life." She leaned down to kiss Gloria's forehead, then grabbed a towel to clean herself up. Gloria coughed softly, a sound that echoed in the quiet room and sent a ripple of unease through Tara's chest. As Tara sat by her mother's bedside that night, she stared at the peeling paint on the wall and whispered to herself, "It has to get better. Somehow." Meanwhile, in a small apartment across town, Walter Higgs sat by a cluttered desk. The wheelchair rested in the corner, still streaked with the morning's mud. Walter reached into a drawer and pulled out a weathered photo of his daughter, Claire. Her bright smile stared back at him, stirring memories of the girl she used to be. Before the arguments, before the distance. With a sigh, Walter grabbed a pen and a blank sheet of paper. He began to write, "Claire, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but..." The words blurred together in his mind. Frustrated, he crumpled the paper and tossed it aside. The weight of the day hung heavily on Tara's shoulders as she trudged toward King's Diner. The bright neon sign flickered against the darkening sky, a beacon of warmth in the bustling streets of Savannah. She pushed open the door, the familiar jingle of the bell momentarily drowning out the thoughts racing through her mind. Behind the counter, Dolores King stood with her arms crossed, her no-nonsense gaze locking onto Tara as soon as she stepped in. Dolores, a stout woman in her late 50s, had run the diner for decades. She prided herself on efficiency and tough love. "Pick it up, girl," Dolores barked as Tara grabbed an apron from the hook near the door. "You're not the only one with problems." "Yes, ma'am," Tara mumbled, tying the apron around her waist. Dolores's stern expression softened briefly as Tara passed by, but she didn't say anything more. Tara set to work clearing tables, her feet dragging slightly. The clatter of plates and the hum of conversation filled the air, blending into a steady rhythm that kept the diner alive. "Well, well, look who's gracing us with her presence," came a familiar voice. Tara looked up to see Lena Carter leaning casually against the counter. "Not now, Lena," Tara said tiredly, stacking plates onto her tray. Lena smirked. "I heard about the detention. Word gets around fast, you know. Didn't peg you for a troublemaker. What happened? Tried to save a kitten or something?" Tara didn't respond, choosing instead to focus on her work. The bell above the door jingled, drawing Tara's attention. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the man struggling to maneuver his wheelchair through the narrow entrance. "Need a hand, sir?" Tara asked, quickly stepping forward to help guide the chair inside. Walter Higgs looked up at her, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "It's you," he said gruffly. "Didn't expect to run into you here." "Small world," Tara said with a faint smile, leading him to a table near the window. Once seated, Walter glanced around, his expression unreadable. "Figured I'd pay for a decent meal today. Let me guess, you're working 2 jobs now?" "Just this one," Tara replied, placing a menu in front of him. Walter grunted. "Guess that makes sense. Kids like you don't get handed much." After serving Walter his meal, a modest plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, Tara lingered nearby, wiping down the counter. "Rough day?" Walter asked between bites, his tone softer than before. Tara hesitated. "It's been a long one," she admitted. "Bet it has," Walter said, nodding toward her mud-streaked uniform. "Looks like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, kid." Tara bit her lip, unsure why she felt compelled to open up. "I was late to school because I stopped to help you this morning," she confessed. "Got detention for it. And now I'm behind on my homework and still have to get my mom's medicine after the shift." Walter listened intently, his brow furrowing. "That's a lot for anyone to handle," he muttered. "Yeah, well," Tara said with a shrug, "it is what it is." From her post near the coffee machine, Lena watched the exchange, her curiosity piqued. She'd always seen Tara as quiet and unremarkable, but something about this moment made her reconsider. After Walter left, Lena approached Tara, leaning against the counter with her usual smirk. "Guess you're not as boring as I thought," she said, crossing her arms. Tara glanced at her, eyebrows raised. "Thanks, I guess." "Don't let it go to your head," Lena said, walking away. Later that evening, as Walter wheeled himself home, he found his thoughts drifting back to Tara. Her determination reminded him of someone, his daughter Claire. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out the weathered photo he always carried. He stopped at a park bench, staring at Claire's smiling face under the glow of a nearby street lamp. "Maybe it's not too late," he murmured, slipping the photo back into his jacket. As the diner's closing time approached, Dolores watched Tara from behind the counter. The girl looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped as she cleaned the last table. "You're tougher than most, kid," Dolores said suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet. "But even the strong need a hand sometimes." Tara looked up, surprised by the uncharacteristic warmth in Dolores's tone. At the end of her shift, Tara found an extra $10 in her tip jar. She glanced toward Dolores, who was wiping down the counter, pretending not to notice. Tara slipped the money into her pocket, whispering a quiet, "Thank you." When Tara returned home, the house was silent except for Gloria's labored breathing. Tara rushed to her mother's bedside, gently administering her medication. "You okay, Mama?" she asked softly. Gloria nodded weakly. "Don't worry about me, baby. Just get some rest." But as Tara lay awake on the couch later that night, staring at the ceiling, rest felt impossible. Her mind raced with thoughts of school, work, and her mother's worsening condition. "I can't fall apart," she whispered to herself. "Not now." The faint hum of rain outside matched the unease that settled over her. The faint morning light seeped through the curtains, painting the walls with a soft glow. Tara stirred on the couch, the ache in her back from another restless night pulling her to wakefulness. But before she could fully rise, a harsh guttural coughing echoed from her mother's room. Tara's heart sank. She bolted to the doorway, finding Gloria slumped against her pillows, her face pale and glistening with sweat. Each breath seemed a monumental effort, her chest rising and falling erratically. "Mom!" Tara rushed to her side, gripping her hand. "You're okay. Just try to relax." Gloria shook her head weakly, trying to wave her daughter off. "I'm fine. It's nothing." "It's not nothing," Tara said firmly, her voice trembling. She grabbed the phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. As the operator assured her help was on the way, Tara knelt by the bed, holding her mother's frail hand. "Hang on, Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We'll get through this, I promise." The wail of sirens broke the tense silence moments later. Paramedics moved quickly, lifting Gloria onto a stretcher, while Tara clung to her mother's hand until the last possible moment. At the hospital, Tara hovered by the reception desk, her anxiety mounting with each passing second. Finally, a nurse approached with a clipboard, glancing at Tara over the rim of her glasses. "Your mother needs immediate care," the nurse began, her tone detached. "But there's a policy. We'll need an upfront payment to proceed." Tara's stomach twisted. I, I don't have that kind of money right now," she said, her voice breaking. "Can't you just start treating her? Please. She's really sick." The nurse sighed, her expression softening slightly but not enough. "I'm sorry. That's not how it works." From across the lobby, Walter Higgs wheeled himself in after his routine VA clinic appointment. His eyes fell on Tara, hunched over in a chair, her hands gripping her knees as though to keep herself together. "Kid?" he called out, his voice cutting through the noise of the bustling hospital. Tara looked up, surprised to see him. She didn't have time to process his presence before Walter wheeled closer, his brow furrowing at her tear-streaked face. "What's going on?" "They won't help her," Tara said, her voice trembling. "They're waiting for payment, and I don't know what to do." Walter frowned, his jaw tightening. Without another word, he turned and rolled toward the desk, cutting in front of the line. "Hey, you got a lady back there who can't breathe, and you're worried about paperwork?" His gruff voice carried across the room, drawing attention. The nurse blinked, startled by his presence. "Sir, we—" Yeah, I've heard it before," Walter interrupted. "Rules are rules, right? Well, this kid's mom doesn't have time for your rules. You start treating her now, or we're going to have a real problem." Despite his forceful tone, the nurse didn't budge. Walter returned to Tara, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I tried," he muttered, his frustration evident. Tara pushed open the heavy hospital doors, the sterile scent of antiseptic giving way to the crisp bite of the evening air. The coolness hit her like a physical force, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside where worry and uncertainty clung to every corner. She took a few unsteady steps before the weight of her emotions became too much, and she leaned against the rough brick wall of the building. The coarse texture pressed into her palms, grounding her just enough to keep her from collapsing. Her breaths came shallow and quick, each inhale catching in her throat as she fought back the tears threatening to spill over. The city sounds seemed distant, muted by the pounding of her heart in her ears. She tilted her head back, gazing up at the darkening sky dotted with the first hints of stars, as if searching for some semblance of peace or answers that wouldn't come. A soft, whirring noise broke through her haze of anxiety. She glanced sideways to see Walter maneuvering his wheelchair over the uneven pavement, his expression a mix of concern and the stoic demeanor he so often wore. He parked beside her, saying nothing at first, offering his silent support in the only way he knew how. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched out, filled only by the distant sounds of traffic and the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. Tara wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold herself together, even as she felt like she was falling apart. "I'm so scared," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. Admitting it felt like a defeat, but also a release. The dam she'd been holding back cracked, and tears welled up, spilling down her cheeks unchecked. "I'm trying so hard to keep everything together, but it's like no matter what I do, it's never enough." Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. "What if I lose her? What if, what if I can't do this on my own?" Walter shifted uncomfortably, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair. Emotional vulnerability was unfamiliar territory, both for him and in others. He looked away for a moment, the muscles in his jaw tightening as he searched for the right words. "Look," he began gruffly, clearing his throat, "you've got grit, kid. More than most people twice your age." He paused, his gaze softening as he turned back to her. "That's worth more than you know." She turned to face him, surprised by the tenderness underlying his rough tone. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw a reflection of her own pain, and a depth of understanding she hadn't expected. "I feel like I'm drowning," she confessed, wiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Every time I think I'm getting ahead, something else pulls me back under." Walter nodded slowly. "Life has a way of knocking us down," he said quietly. "But it's not about how many times you fall, it's about how many times you get back up." Tara let his words sink in, the simplicity of his statement resonating deeply. Her breathing began to steady, the tightness in her chest easing just a fraction. "I just don't know if I'm strong enough," she admitted. "You are," Walter replied firmly. "Trust me. Takes one to know one." A faint, fleeting smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "You think so?" "I know so." He hesitated for a moment before reaching into the pocket of his worn jacket. Pulling out a crumpled $50 bill, he smoothed it out against his knee and held it out to her. "It's not much," he said, his voice softer now. "But maybe it'll help, with hospital bills or whatever you need." Tara stared at the money, a mix of gratitude and guilt swirling within her. "I can't take that," she whispered, shaking her head. "You've already done so much." He gave a small dismissive wave. "Nonsense. Consider it payback for getting me out of that mud, and for reminding an old fool that there's still good people in the world." She looked into his eyes, seeing the earnestness there. With a hesitant hand, she accepted the bill, her fingers brushing lightly against his calloused ones. "Thank you," she said, her voice laden with emotion. "Really?" They fell into a comfortable silence, the earlier tension easing into something more peaceful. The sounds of the city began to filter back in, the distant honking of horns, the murmur of conversations from passers-by, the rustle of leaves overhead. "Your mom's lucky to have you," Walter said after a while. "Not everyone would shoulder the burdens you have." "I just wish I could do more," Tara replied softly, folding the bill carefully before slipping it into her pocket. "You're doing all you can," he assured her, "and sometimes that's enough." She took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs and clearing some of the fog of despair. "It doesn't feel like it," he gave a half smile. "Feelings are tricky like that, but actions, that's where the truth is. And your actions tell me you're one of the strongest people I've met." Tara glanced at him, a genuine smile ghosting across her lips for the first time that day. "You're not so bad yourself," she teased lightly. He chuckled softly, a raspy sound that hinted at a laugh long unused. "Don't go spreading rumors now." The weight on her shoulders felt just a bit lighter, the path ahead a little less daunting. "I won't," she promised. "Your secret's safe with me." They remained there for a few more minutes, side by side against the backdrop of the hospital's facade, two unlikely companions finding solace in each other's company. In that shared moment, the enormity of their individual struggles seemed a little more bearable. As Tara straightened up, preparing to head back inside, she looked at Walter with gratitude shining in her eyes. "I should get back," she said softly, "but thank you for everything." He nodded, his expression unreadable, but his eyes conveying what words didn't. "Anytime, kid." She turned and walked toward the entrance, a renewed determination in her stride. Walter watched her go, a subtle nod of respect and understanding passing between them. As the doors closed behind her, he took a deep breath, the cool night air filling his lungs. "Hang in there," he murmured to himself, before wheeling away into the shadows, both of them carrying a piece of the other's strength into the battles that lay ahead. Walter began to talk with more openness. He spoke about losing his wife and how he'd pushed his daughter away in the years that followed. "I thought I was tough enough to handle it alone," he admitted, staring at the ground. "Turns out I wasn't." Tara listened, her heart aching at the pain in his voice. "It's never too late to fix things," she said quietly. Walter glanced at her, a flicker of hope crossing his face. Later that day, Tara sat in the hospital waiting room, her mind racing. Desperate, she picked up her phone and dialed Lena. "Hey," Tara said hesitantly when Lena answered. I need a favor." "About time you asked," Lena replied, her tone surprisingly genuine. "What's up?" Tara explained the situation, and Lena agreed without hesitation. "Don't worry, I'll spread the word at school. We'll figure something out." Back at school, Principal Grant overheard Lena discussing Tara's situation with a group of students. Intrigued, he began asking questions, piecing together the full story. By the end of the day, Grant had made up his mind. He would rally the school and community to help Tara. That evening, Gloria stirred in her hospital bed, her eyes fluttering open. Tara leaned forward, her heart leaping. "Mom?" Gloria's voice was weak but steady. "We'll get through this, baby. We always do." Tara nodded, though her worry lingered in the back of her mind. Meanwhile, across town, Walter sat in his small apartment, flipping through an old address book. His fingers hovered over a name, an old military contact before dialing. "Yeah, it's Walter," he said when the line connected. "I need a favor." The faint hum of the school's fluorescent lights did little to mask Principal Samuel Grant's growing concern. He sat in his office flipping through Tara Monroe's academic records. The picture they painted was clear. Early years filled with excellent grades, a steady work ethic, and glowing teacher comments. But in the past 6 months, things had changed. Attendance inconsistencies, declining grades, and frequent tardiness dotted her file like warning signs. Grant leaned back in his chair, his mind drifting to the moment he'd seen Tara helping the man in the wheelchair. That kind of selflessness didn't align with someone careless or unfocused. Something else was at play. Throughout the day, Grant kept an eye on Tara as she moved through the hallways. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of her backpack, her steps dragging slightly. At lunch, she sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, poking at the sandwich she'd brought from home. He noticed her uniform, slightly worn and still faintly stained from the rain and mud of the previous morning. Nearby, other students laughed and chatted in groups, their voices carrying across the room. Tara, however, seemed to withdraw further, her isolation palpable. Grant made a mental note. Whatever she was dealing with, it was bigger than just slipping grades. "Lena Carter," Grant called from the doorway of his office later that afternoon. Lena glanced up, her usual smirk faltering slightly. "What's this about?" she asked, stepping inside with a mix of defiance and curiosity. "Take a seat," Grant said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Reluctantly, Lena sat down. "Look, if this is about the fundraiser thing—" "That's exactly what it's about," Grant interrupted, his tone calm but firm. "I've noticed you've been unusually involved in helping Tara. Care to explain why?" Lena crossed her arms. "What, a girl can't help out a friend?" "You and I both know you haven't exactly been the helping type," Grant replied. "So what's changed?" Lena hesitated, her tough exterior cracking slightly. "She's got it rough, okay? Tougher than any of us. Her mom's sick, and she's basically running herself into the ground, trying to keep up with school, work, and everything else." Grant nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "Thank you for being honest," he said, "and for stepping up. It's not easy to lead, but it looks like you're starting to figure it out." Lena blinked, caught off guard by the compliment. "Yeah, well, someone's got to do it," she muttered. That evening, as Tara dragged herself into King's Diner for her shift, exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. The clinking of plates and hum of conversation filled the room as usual, but Tara barely noticed. Dolores King eyed her from behind the counter, frowning. "You look like a ghost girl," she said, her voice cutting through the din. "I'm fine," Tara replied automatically, tying her apron. Dolores grabbed her by the arm, her grip firm but not unkind. "You're burning the candle at both ends," she said, her tone softening. "You'll collapse if you don't slow down." Tara nodded silently, pulling away to start clearing tables. As the night wore on, a particularly impatient customer began tapping his fork loudly on the counter. "Hey, some service here," he barked, his tone sharp enough to draw stares. Tara hurried over, apologizing softly as she refilled his coffee. "About time," the man muttered. "Kids these days. No work ethic." Before Tara could respond, a gruff voice cut in from a nearby booth. "The girl's working harder than most people twice her age," Walter said, his tone low but commanding. "Show some respect." The man looked up, startled, before grumbling something unintelligible and turning back to his plate. Tara glanced at Walter, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Thanks," she whispered. Walter shrugged, his focus already back on his coffee. Later, as the diner emptied out, Walter leaned back in his wheelchair, staring at the ceiling. He thought about Tara's resilience, her quiet determination despite the odds stacked against her. Pulling out his phone, he scrolled through his contacts until he landed on a familiar name, Earl Johnson. Earl had been a sergeant during their service days and now led a local veterans organization. Earl, Walter said when the line connected. It's been a while, but I need a favor. There's this kid. She's something special. We need to help her out. At the next PTA meeting, Principal Grant stood at the front of the room, his usual calm demeanor giving way to visible passion. This isn't just about one student, he said, addressing the room. This is about showing our kids that when life gets tough, they're not alone. Tara Monroe has shown more courage and kindness than most adults I know. It's time we repay that. By the end of the meeting, the PTA had unanimously agreed to support a school-wide fundraiser. Meanwhile, Dolores offered the diner as a venue for planning meetings, her usual gruffness giving way to determination. If it's for Tara, you can count me in, she said firmly. When Grant informed Tara of the fundraiser, she shook her head vehemently. I don't want people thinking I'm some charity case, she said, her voice edged with embarrassment. This isn't about pity, Tara, Grant replied gently. It's about recognizing and supporting someone who inspires others. And that someone is you. It took Lena's persistence to finally convince Tara to agree. You've carried enough weight on your own, Lena said, her tone unusually serious. Let us do this for you. That evening, as Tara walked home, she noticed small but significant changes, a neighbor waving from their porch, a sense of warmth in the air. Across town, Walter stared at his phone, his finger hovering over Claire's contact. With a deep breath, he pressed the call button. The phone rang, each tone echoing louder in his mind. The air in Principal Grant's office buzzed with a rare energy as the planning committee gathered around the long table. Notes, flyers, and an oversized calendar were spread across the surface. The fundraiser set to take place at King's Diner was beginning to take shape under Grant's leadership. This is more than just an event, Grant said, addressing the group. It's a chance for our community to show what we're capable of when we come together. The attendees nodded, their initial hesitation giving way to enthusiasm. Outside, Dolores King had already begun organizing logistics, her usual gruff demeanor masking a growing excitement. At the same time, Tara struggled with the idea of being the event's focus. Sitting in the back corner of the cafeteria, she confided in Lena, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can do this, Tara admitted, glancing down at her hands. It feels wrong, like I'm begging. Lena shook her head firmly. This isn't about pity, she said, leaning forward. It's about giving people a chance to do the right thing, just like you did for that old guy in the wheelchair. Don't rob them of that. Tara let out a shaky breath, Lena's words echoing in her mind. Walter Higgs, meanwhile, threw himself into the planning process with unexpected vigor. His connection to Earl Johnson, a leader in the local veterans organization, proved invaluable. Together, they reached out to businesses, local influencers, and other veterans, sharing Tara's story of kindness and resilience. She reminded me that kindness doesn't have to come with strings, Walter said during one meeting. It's time we showed her the same. Despite the growing support, early registration numbers were underwhelming. The planning committee began to worry, their enthusiasm dampened by the lack of immediate interest. Principal Grant worked tirelessly to generate buzz, tapping into his network of local media contacts. Radio announcements, social media posts, and flyers soon flooded the community. At home, Tara felt the pressure mounting. Between school, shifts at the diner, and caring for her mother, she barely had time to sleep. Gloria's condition had stabilized for now, but the worry lingered. One evening at the diner, Dolores pulled Tara aside, her expression unusually soft. You've got a lot on your plate, kid, she said, resting a hand on Tara's shoulder. But you've also got people who care about you. Let them help for once. Tara nodded silently, Dolores's words resonating in a way she hadn't expected. Back at school, Lena's involvement took center stage. She rallied students to help organize booths, raffles, and performances for the event. Her unexpected leadership earned her a newfound respect among her peers. When a few students mocked the fundraiser as unnecessary, Lena confronted them head-on, her voice steady but sharp. Tara's done more for people than any of us have. The least we can do is show up for her. Her defiance silenced the critics, and support for the event grew. Meanwhile, Walter faced a personal challenge of his own. Sitting in his small apartment, he stared at his phone, Claire's number glowing on the screen. With a deep breath, he pressed call. The conversation was tense at first. Claire's voice distant and skeptical. But as Walter spoke, his sincerity began to chip away at her walls. "I'm trying to be better," he said, his voice cracking. "And it's because of a kid who didn't owe me anything, but showed me kindness anyway." By the end of the call, Claire agreed to meet him after the fundraiser, leaving Walter with a glimmer of hope. The night before the event, a heavy thunderstorm swept through Savannah. Rain pounded against windows and lightning lit up the sky. At King's Diner, the planning committee scrambled to adjust, moving most activities indoors. Tara stayed up late, pacing in her small living room. The sound of the storm mirrored the storm in her mind, worries swirling uncontrollably. "What if no one shows up?" she whispered to herself. Gloria, lying on the couch, reached for her hand. "Sometimes the hardest part is letting people in," she said softly. "But you've done enough, Tara. Let them take it from here." By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind clear skies and a renewed sense of hope. As Tara approached King's Diner, her heart pounded in her chest. But as she rounded the corner, her breath caught. A crowd was beginning to gather outside, neighbors and strangers alike. Booths were being set up, volunteers bustled with last-minute preparations, and a sense of energy filled the air. For the first time in days, Tara allowed herself to smile. Tara arrived at King's Diner just after sunrise, the morning air still cool and crisp. The diner was already alive with activity, volunteers decorating tables, arranging raffle prizes, and assembling booths both inside and outside. The remnants of the previous night's storm lingered in the form of puddles and muddy ground, but the sunshine promised a clear day ahead. Dolores King stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, directing traffic with her signature blend of authority and efficiency. "Tara, over here," she called, her tone brisk but warm. "Morning," Tara said quietly, taking in the chaotic scene. "Morning? Looks like you barely slept," Dolores said, eyeing her critically. "But no time for that now. Grab some tablecloths and start setting up inside." Tara nodded and got to work, grateful for the distraction. A few minutes later, Lena arrived carrying a box of handmade signs. She plopped it onto the nearest counter and smirked at Tara. "Ready for the big show, superstar?" "Not really," Tara admitted, smoothing a tablecloth over one of the diner's booths. Lena rolled her eyes. "Relax. It's gonna be fine. Better than fine." Before Tara could respond, the door jingled and Walter Higgs rolled in, looking surprisingly energetic. "Morning, kid," Walter said, wheeling himself toward her. "Morning, Mr. Higgs," Tara replied, straightening up. Walter gave her a wry smile. "You've done more than your share, kid. Now it's time for the rest of us to step up." His words settled something in Tara, easing the knot of anxiety in her chest. As the event officially began, early challenges quickly surfaced. Despite the sunshine, the muddy ground made it impossible to set up many of the outdoor booths. Volunteers scrambled to adjust, moving tables and decorations inside, causing temporary chaos. Tara stood near the entrance, wringing her hands as the first attendees trickled in. The sparse turnout only added to her nerves. "What if no one shows up?" she whispered to Lena, who was passing by with a tray of raffle tickets. "Give it time," Lena said, not breaking stride. About an hour later, the crowd was still thin, and the air in the diner grew tense. Principal Grant, noticing the unease, stepped outside to make a few phone calls. Minutes later, local media crews began arriving, their cameras and reporters instantly drawing attention. Within moments, the trickle of attendees turned into a steady stream. Inside, Lena climbed onto a makeshift stage and grabbed a microphone. Clearing her throat, she addressed the crowd. "Listen up, everyone," she began, her voice cutting through the din. "This isn't just about helping one family. This is about proving what we can do when we take care of our own. Tara Monroe didn't ask for any of this. She's been too busy helping everyone else. So let's show her what happens when a community comes together." The crowd erupted in applause, the energy in the room shifting palpably. As the crowd inside the diner swelled, the chatter of attendees softened when the lights dimmed slightly. All eyes turned toward the small stage at the far end of the room. A group of students, clutching microphones and instruments, stepped nervously into the spotlight. The murmurs quieted, curiosity rippling through the audience. The lead student, a girl from Tara's math class, spoke into the microphone. This one's for Tara and her mom, for reminding all of us that even in the darkest times, kindness can light the way. A hush fell over the room as the first notes filled the air. The gentle strumming of a guitar laid the foundation, and the students' voices joined together, clear and full of emotion. The lyrics spoke of strength in adversity, of finding hope in the smallest gestures, and of the courage it takes to keep going when the odds feel insurmountable. Tara sat frozen near the edge of the room, her hands pressed against her lap, her heart pounding. As the song swelled, so did her emotions. Her throat tightened and tears filled her eyes, blurring the sight of her classmates pouring their hearts into the performance. When the final note rang out, the room was silent for a beat, a collective breath held in awe, before erupting into cheers and applause. The sound was deafening, the kind of roar that shakes the walls and fills the soul. Tara wiped at her tears, overwhelmed by the love and effort behind the gesture. "I didn't know they were going to do that," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Beside her, Lena leaned against the wall, her arms crossed but her expression unusually soft. "Neither did I," she admitted, glancing toward the stage. For a moment, her usual sarcasm was absent, replaced by something quieter, almost reverent. The two shared a brief, wordless moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them as the applause continued to echo around them. For Tara, it was a moment that felt like more than gratitude. It felt like belonging. Walter took the stage next, his wheelchair creaking slightly as he adjusted the microphone. The room fell silent as he began to speak. "Most of you know me, or at least you've seen me rolling around this town," Walter began, his voice gruff but steady. "What you might not know is that not too long ago, I was stuck. Stuck in more ways than one." He paused, glancing at Tara. "This girl didn't just pull my wheelchair out of the mud. She reminded me that kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing I've ever seen. And if someone like her exists, maybe the rest of us have a chance to be better too." His words moved the crowd, inspiring a wave of donations. Midway through the event, Walter noticed a familiar face lingering near the back of the room. Claire. She stood hesitantly, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. After a moment's pause, Walter wheeled toward her. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, his voice low. Claire crossed her arms. "I wasn't sure I would." The conversation that followed was quiet but charged with emotion. Walter apologized, his voice faltering as he admitted to his mistakes. Though hesitant, Claire softened slightly. "You've changed," she said finally. "I see it. Let's take this one step at a time." Walter nodded, hope flickering in his eyes. As the event drew to a close, Dolores stepped onto the stage to make an announcement. "We've hit our goal," she said, her voice ringing out clearly. The room erupted into cheers and applause. Tara, stunned, was nudged onto the stage by Lena. Her hands shook as she gripped the microphone. "I never thought kindness could ripple out this far," Tara said, her voice breaking slightly. "Thank you for proving me wrong." The crowd cheered again, many wiping tears from their eyes. As the attendees began to leave, several local businesses approached Tara with offers of ongoing support. Grocery stores pledged weekly deliveries, a pharmacy promised free medical supplies, and others offered similar commitments. That evening, as the diner cleared out, Tara, Walter, Lena, and Dolores sat together at a booth, sharing a quiet moment. "Not bad for a bunch of misfits," Lena said, raising a soda can and a mock toast. Walter glanced toward Claire, who was standing nearby. She caught his eye and gave a small, tentative smile. Later, Tara stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars above shone brightly, the storm long forgotten. "Maybe things really can get better," she whispered to herself, a sense of hope settling over her. Tara and Gloria returned home that evening, their bodies weary but their hearts full. The little house felt different, warmer, brighter, as though the kindness of the community had seeped into its very walls. Gloria settled into her bed with Tara's help, her pale face tinged with a faint smile. She looked around the room, her eyes glistening. "You're surrounded by angels, Tara," she said softly. "You've earned every bit of this." Tara squeezed her mother's hand, unable to hold back her own smile. "We're not through it yet, Mama," she replied, but her voice carried a rare note of hope. Meanwhile, not far from the diner, Walter and Claire sat together on a park bench beneath the soft glow of a street lamp. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. "I'm sorry," Walter began, his voice rough but steady. He stared at his hands as he spoke, his words carrying years of regret. "After your mother died, I thought shutting you out would make me stronger, but all it did was make me lonelier." Claire sat silently for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "It hurt," she finally said, her voice breaking slightly. "You didn't just push me away. You made me feel like I didn't matter." Walter nodded, his shoulders slumping. "You did matter. You still do," he said, glancing at her for the first time. "And I know I've got a lot to make up for." Claire wiped at her eyes, her resolve softening. "I'm here now because of what you did today," she admitted, her tone still cautious. "It showed me you're trying." "One step at a time," Walter said, offering a tentative smile. Claire hesitated before nodding. "One step at a time," she agreed. Back at home, Tara sat at the kitchen table, a notebook open in front of her. Writing had always been her way of processing the chaos around her. The pen moved across the page almost on its own as she wrote a letter to herself, reflecting on the day. "Kindness isn't weakness," she wrote. "It's strength. It's what builds bridges when everything feels broken." The words brought her a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. A knock at the door pulled Tara from her thoughts. When she opened it, Lena stood on the porch, holding a large card in her hands. "From everyone at school," Lena said, handing it over. Tara opened the card to find it filled with signatures, messages of encouragement, and a few awkward drawings. Her throat tightened as she read the words. "You're not as alone as you think," Lena said, her voice unusually soft. "Thanks, Lena," Tara replied, her gratitude evident. The next morning brought more good news. Gloria's doctor called to confirm that the funds raised at the fundraiser would cover a critical surgery. The operation, he explained, could significantly improve Gloria's condition. Tara could hardly believe it. She hurried to Walter's apartment that afternoon, tears in her eyes as she knocked on his door. When he opened it, she blurted out, "None of this would have happened without you." Walter waved her off, though his expression was touched. "You give me too much credit, kid," he said. "You're the one who started all this with that big heart of yours." Later, Claire reached out to Tara, offering her professional connections as a healthcare administrator to ensure Gloria received the best care possible. "Thank you," Tara said earnestly during one of their meetings. Claire smiled. "It's the least I can do. You've shown me what real strength looks like." As the two began to work together, Tara found herself asking Claire about Walter's past. "He wasn't always so gruff," Claire said, a faint smile on her face. "He used to be funny, kind. Grief changed him, but I see glimpses of the old him now." The stories deepened Tara's appreciation for Walter and his journey. Buoyed by the community's support and her mother's improving health, Tara began to think about the future, something she hadn't dared to do in years. She decided to write a letter to Principal Grant, thanking him for his leadership. She delivered the letter to his office, slipping it onto his desk before he arrived. Later that day, Grant read it aloud to himself, his smile suggesting how deeply her words had touched him. One evening, Walter called Tara to his apartment. When she arrived, he handed her a small box. Inside was a locket. She opened it to find a picture of herself and Gloria, taken during the fundraiser, along with the words, "For the one who taught me how to move forward." Tara's eyes filled with tears as she fastened the locket around her neck. As the day wound down, Tara took a walk through her neighborhood, the locket resting against her chest. The streets felt different now, less daunting, more alive with possibility. "Maybe things really can get better," she whispered to herself, a small smile playing on her lips. The morning sun poured through the windows of Savannah High School's auditorium, casting long shadows across the stage. Tara sat near the back, her thoughts elsewhere, as students filed into the room for what she assumed was a routine assembly. She tapped her pen against her notebook absent-mindedly, oblivious to the glances and murmurs around her. Principal Grant stepped up to the podium, clearing his throat. The room quieted instantly, his authoritative presence commanding attention. "Good morning, students and staff," he began, his voice steady and calm. "Today, we're here to celebrate an extraordinary act of kindness and resilience, one that reminds us of the power we hold to change lives." Tara glanced up, her brow furrowing in curiosity. As Grant continued detailing the story of the fundraiser, her heart sank. The realization hit her like a wave. This individual has shown us what it means to rise above adversity and inspire others to do the same, Grant said, gesturing toward the back. "Tara Monroe, please join me on stage." Gasps and applause erupted around her. Tara froze, her face flushing with disbelief. Slowly, she rose from her seat, every step toward the stage feeling surreal. As she reached the podium, Grant handed her a certificate, the words Community Excellence Scholarship printed in bold letters. A local philanthropist, inspired by Walter Higgs's account of Tara's selflessness, has generously funded this scholarship, Grant announced. It will cover Tara's college education entirely. The room broke into cheers, and Tara, holding the certificate tightly, struggled to find her voice. I didn't do anything extraordinary," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I just did what felt right, and you all turned that into something I never imagined. Thank you." The applause swelled. Many in the audience moved to tears. Later that afternoon, Tara walked home, still clutching the certificate. She turned the corner and stopped in her tracks. Parked in front of her house was a sleek, used luxury car that gleamed in the sunlight. Standing beside it was Claire, holding a set of keys. "What's going on?" Tara asked, her voice laced with confusion. Claire smiled, stepping forward. "This isn't just a car," she explained. "It's a key to freedom, to opportunities you've worked so hard to deserve. I wanted to thank you for inspiring me to reconnect with my father." Tara stared at the car, overwhelmed. "I can't. I mean, this is too much," she said, shaking her head. Gloria, watching from the doorway, chimed in. "Baby, you've earned this. Let it be a blessing, not a burden." Walter, wheeling himself up the sidewalk, added, "Use it wisely, kid. It's not about the car. It's about what it'll let you do." After a moment's hesitation, Tara accepted the keys, tears welling in her eyes. The following week, Gloria underwent surgery. Tara stayed by her mother's side, pacing the hospital halls and clutching her locket for comfort. When the doctor finally emerged with a smile, Tara's legs nearly gave out. "The surgery went well," he said. "She's going to need time to recover, but things are looking good." Tara collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief. Meanwhile, Walter and Claire's relationship continued to mend, piece by fragile piece. It began with cautious phone calls, short, polite conversations that gradually grew into something more personal. Eventually, Claire invited Walter to her home for dinner. The first evening was tentative, filled with careful smiles and safe topics. Claire's husband, Mark, and their young son, Ben, watched as Walter fumbled his way through reconnecting with the family he'd long pushed away. But as the visits became more frequent, the atmosphere began to shift. One evening, Claire set the table while Walter shared a story with Ben about his days in the service. The boy, wide-eyed, leaned forward, hanging on every word. Walter's voice, usually gruff, softened as he described the camaraderie he'd shared with his fellow soldiers. "And then," Walter said, his lips curving into a rare smile, "we realized we'd been following the map upside down the whole time. Let's just say we didn't live that one down for weeks." Laughter erupted around the table, the kind of easy, genuine laughter Walter hadn't heard in years. Claire, seated across from him, watched quietly, her eyes reflecting both joy and something deeper, hope. After dinner, as Mark cleared the dishes and Ben dashed off to play, Claire lingered at the table with Walter. "You've changed, Dad," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I can see it, and I'm proud of you." Walter looked at her, the words catching him off guard. His throat tightened as he tried to respond, his usual defenses nowhere to be found. "It took a kid like Tara to show me how," he finally said, his voice thick with sincerity. Claire reached across the table, her hand resting on his. "Whatever it was, I'm glad it happened," she said, a small smile touching her lips. Walter nodded, the warmth of her hand grounding him in the moment. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged, not just as a guest, but as a father. As Gloria's health improved, Tara began preparing for college, a dream that no longer felt out of reach. She chose nursing, inspired by her journey caring for Gloria. Lena, ever the jokester, teased Tara during one of their study sessions. When you get that fancy dorm room, don't forget who made you cool enough to get there. Tara laughed, shaking her head. Oh, I'll remember, and I'll let you decorate. Embarrassing but tasteful, right? One evening, Tara visited Walter at his apartment, carrying a small wrapped package. Inside was a hand-drawn card depicting Walter in his wheelchair surrounded by a heart-shaped crowd. Walter stared at the card for a long moment, his eyes glistening. You've got a knack for this, kid, he said finally, placing it on his mantle. Tara sat in the driver's seat of her new car, Gloria beside her and Walter in the back. They drove to the coast as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. As the waves crashed gently on the shore, Tara whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." The days following Gloria's surgery unfolded like a cautious dawn, with light breaking through the shadows bit by bit. Gloria's recovery at home brought a renewed sense of purpose to the household. Though her strength was still a work in progress, she could now sit up for longer periods and even shuffle short distances with Tara's help. Don't forget your medicine, Mama, Tara reminded, setting a glass of water and a pill organizer on the nightstand. Gloria smiled faintly, her gratitude evident. I haven't forgotten, she said, her voice steadier than it had been in months. You're the one I can't forget. You've done so much, baby. Tara kissed her mother's forehead, whispering, We've done it together, Mama. Tara's nights were a blur of relentless effort, each one blending into the next. After long shifts at the diner, she would come home, change into her most comfortable clothes, and settle at the kitchen table. The small space was cluttered with nursing program brochures, half-written application essays, and a few textbooks she had borrowed from the school library. The soft glow of her aging laptop cast shadows across her tired face. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating on how to phrase her dreams, her ambitions, her need for a better future. Not just for herself, but for her mother. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, but her determination refused to let her quit. The quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the room, broken only by the occasional sigh as she pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. The clock ticked closer to midnight, but Tara didn't dare look up, knowing it would only remind her of how little time she had to rest. A sudden knock at the door startled her. She blinked, rubbing her eyes, and shuffled to answer it. There stood Dolores King, her sturdy frame silhouetted against the porch light. In her hands was a small basket filled with a thermos of coffee, a box of cookies, and a few granola bars. Ms. Dolores? Tara asked, surprised. Dolores stepped inside, setting the basket on the counter without waiting for an invitation. I noticed you've been running yourself ragged, she said gruffly. Figured you could use a little fuel if you're going to keep burning the midnight oil. Tara's lips curved into a genuine smile, warmth spreading through her chest. You didn't have to do this, she said, her voice soft. Dolores waved her off with a dismissive hand. Don't make a big deal out of it, she said, though her tone betrayed her affection. She gestured toward the table. How's the essay coming? Tara glanced back at the mess of papers in her laptop. Slow, she admitted, but I'll get there. Dolores nodded approvingly. You always do. Just don't forget to take care of yourself while you're at it. Tara picked up the thermos, the comforting aroma of coffee wafting up to meet her. Thank you, Ms. Dolores, she said sincerely, her smile reaching her eyes. Dolores patted Tara's shoulder before heading for the door. Get some sleep when you can, kid, she said over her shoulder. The world will still be there tomorrow. As the door clicked shut behind her, Tara returned to the table, the care package a silent reminder that she wasn't as alone in her efforts as she sometimes felt. Bolstered by the gesture, she took a deep breath, opened her laptop, and began typing again. The words flowed a little easier now. Across town, Walter Higgs found himself drawn to the local Veterans Support Center. He wheeled into the familiar building with a renewed sense of purpose, inspired by Tara's kindness. Gathering a small group of younger veterans, Walter shared his story, speaking candidly about his struggles and the simple act of compassion that reignited his hope. Sometimes it takes someone else's strength to remind you of your own, he said, his voice firm but warm. His words resonated, leading to an influx of new volunteers and donations for the center. Walter's involvement revitalized not only the organization, but also his own sense of belonging. In the spirit of celebration, Dolores organized a small thank you party at King's Diner for everyone who had contributed to the fundraiser. The diner buzzed with laughter and music, the air filled with the aroma of home-cooked meals. Tara stood on the small stage, her hands gripping the microphone. Her voice shook slightly as she began to speak. "You've all shown me that we're never really alone, even when life feels impossible," she said, her words carrying the weight of her gratitude. "Thank you for everything." The room erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. As the crowd dispersed, Lena approached Tara with a large, colorful scrapbook. "Don't say I never did anything for you," Lena joked, shoving the book into Tara's hands. Flipping through its pages, Tara found photos, handwritten notes, and doodles from classmates chronicling her journey over the past few months. "You're going to crush it in college," Lena said, her voice softening. She quickly added, "But don't let it get to your head." Tara laughed, her heart full. In a quiet moment during the party, Claire pulled Tara aside. "You're going to change so many lives," Claire said, placing a hand on Tara's shoulder. "But don't forget to take care of yourself, too." Tara nodded, the sincerity in Claire's voice leaving a lasting impression. Their bond deepened, Claire becoming a mentor Tara hadn't realized she needed. A few days later, Walter called Tara and asked her to stop by his apartment. His voice on the phone was uncharacteristically soft, almost nervous. Tara, curious but slightly apprehensive, agreed. When she arrived, Walter was waiting at the door, his wheelchair positioned just inside the entryway. "Come on in," he said, clearing his throat. There was a hint of something unusual in his demeanor, a mix of vulnerability and anticipation. Tara stepped inside, the familiar scent of old books and coffee filling the small space. Walter rolled toward a side table, where a small package, carefully wrapped in plain brown paper, sat waiting. I, I've been meaning to give you this," Walter said, picking up the package and holding it out with both hands. His usual gruffness was replaced with a quiet hesitance. Tara took the package, glancing at him before peeling back the paper. Her breath hitched as the contents were revealed, a beautifully framed photograph of her and Gloria from the fundraiser. They were mid-laughter, their joy captured perfectly in the moment. Below the image, in Walter's neat handwriting, were the words, "For the girl who taught me how to live again." Tara stared at the photo, her vision blurring with tears. Her fingers trembled as she traced the frame's edge, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and overwhelming emotion. "Mr. Higgs," she began, her voice catching. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering. Walter shifted uncomfortably, scratching the back of his neck. "I just thought you should have something to remember this by," he said gruffly, though his own eyes glistened faintly. Tara's lips quivered into a smile as she clutched the frame to her chest. "This means so much to me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything." Walter gave a small nod, his own emotions barely contained. "No, kid," he said after a pause, his tone soft. "Thank you for reminding me how to hope again." The room fell into a quiet warmth, the kind of silence that didn't need words. In that moment, their connection felt unshakable, a bond forged through kindness, resilience, and mutual healing. The final scene unfolded on a warm evening, with Tara, Gloria, and Walter driving to the Savannah Veterans Memorial. The car hummed softly as they approached the quiet, reflective space. Walter led them to a bench overlooking a sprawling field of flags. He began sharing stories of his fallen comrades, his voice steady and reverent. "They gave everything," Walter said, "and because of them, I get a second chance to be better, to give back." Tara listened intently, the weight of his words settling in her heart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Tara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Life would always have challenges, she realized, but with the support of others and the strength of kindness, Those challenges could become opportunities for growth. Walter broke the silence with a thoughtful remark. Sometimes it takes someone special to remind you that life isn't about what you've lost. It's about what you can still give. Tara smiled, reaching for Gloria's hand. The story closed with the three of them sitting together on the bench, watching the sunset. The air was filled with peace, hope, and the quiet promise of a brighter future. The story of Tara, Walter, and Gloria isn't just about overcoming hardships. It's a testament to the power of kindness and community. Small actions like Tara helping Walter out of the mud can spark profound changes, not only for those directly involved, but for everyone inspired by the ripple effect. Looking back on their journey, a deep lesson emerges. Life isn't defined by what we've lost or the challenges we face, but by the opportunities we seize to give love and make a difference. Strength doesn't always mean enduring alone. Sometimes it's about accepting help and building connections with others. What about you? Have you ever witnessed or done something small that made a big difference? Share your thoughts or stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this story and want to join us on a journey of discovering more meaningful tales, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another heartwarming story. Let's keep spreading kindness for a warmer, brighter world. Thank you for watching.